Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the U.S. Liberty, watching the stars through the main view screen. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he barely noticed. The human exploration fleet had been traveling through uncharted space for 3 months now, and every day brought the same endless darkness dotted with distant suns. The mission was simple: find new worlds that humans could call home. What they found instead was something nobody had prepared for. The proximity alarm started beeping, and Lieutenant Commander Ryan Tucker looked up from his tactical station. "Captain, we have multiple contacts appearing on sensors," he said, his voice carrying a hint of concern. "Distance is about 50,000 kilometers and closing." Morrison set down his coffee mug and walked closer to the center of the bridge. "How many contacts, Ryan?" 15 ships, sir. They're big, really big. Each one is at least 10 times the size of our vessels." Tucker's fingers danced across his console, pulling up more detailed readings. Energy signatures are off the charts, but the technology seems different. Commander Lisa Hayes, the fleet's communications officer, turned in her chair to face the captain. "Sir, I'm picking up some kind of transmission. It's on multiple frequencies, and it's being broadcast in what sounds like 17 different languages." "Put it on speakers," Morrison ordered, settling into his command chair. The bridge fell quiet as everyone waited to hear humanity's first contact with alien life. What came through the speakers was unlike anything they had expected. A deep, booming voice filled the bridge, speaking in perfect English, but with an accent that sounded both ancient and pompous. "Attention, insignificant vessels of unknown origin. You have entered the sacred borders of the great Sci-Fi Galactic Empire, rulers of 1,000 worlds and masters of the void between stars." Lisa pressed her hand over her mouth, trying not to laugh. The alien speech was so overly dramatic that it sounded like something from a bad movie. Morrison raised an eyebrow and gestured for her to keep listening. "I am Admiral Vexthil of the Imperial Border Guard, commanding the might of Zephyria in this sector of space. Your pathetic vessels dare to trespass in our glorious domain without permission, tribute, or proper respect for our infinite wisdom and power." Chief Engineer Samantha Brooks, who had been quietly running scans from her station, looked up with a puzzled expression. "Captain, their ships might be huge, but the technology inside them is ancient. I'm reading plasma-based weapon systems and basic fusion drives. We passed that level of tech about 200 years ago." Morrison nodded slowly, processing this information while the alien admiral continued his lengthy speech. The transmission had been going on for nearly 10 minutes now, with Admiral Vexthil describing the history of the Zephyrian Empire, their countless victories, and their divine right to rule the galaxy. It was the most self-important thing Morrison had ever heard. "Furthermore," the admiral continued, "your primitive species will immediately surrender all vessels to Zephyrian authority. You will provide tribute in the form of rare minerals, scientific knowledge, and acknowledgement of Zephyrian superiority over all lesser beings. Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your insignificant fleet." The bridge. Crew exchanged glances. Dr. Helen Carter, the fleet's xenobiologist, had joined them during the speech and was taking notes on her tablet. She looked fascinated rather than frightened. "This is remarkable," she whispered to Morrison. "Their entire approach is based on intimidation and ceremony. They expect us to be terrified." Morrison stood up and walked to Lisa's station. "Open a channel back to them," he said with a slight grin. "Channel open, sir," Lisa replied, though she looked like she was struggling not to burst into laughter. Morrison cleared his throat and activated the communication system. "Admiral Vexthil, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Liberty. I have just one question for you." The response came immediately, as if the admiral had been waiting eagerly for humanity's surrender. Speak quickly, primitive being. The great Zephyrian Empire does not have time to waste on inferior species. Morrison paused for effect, looking. Around it his crew members, who were all watching with barely contained amusement. Did you guys practice that speech in the mirror? Because it really shows. The silence that followed was deafening. For a full 30 seconds, no sound came through the communication system. Morrison could almost picture the confusion on the alien bridge. Finally, Admiral Vexthow's voice returned, but it sounded uncertain and confused. What ... What did you just say? I asked if you practiced that speech, Morrison replied casually, as if he were discussing the weather. You know, standing in front of a mirror, working on your dramatic pauses, making sure you sound appropriately menacing. It was very theatrical, I'll give you that. Ryan Tucker was covering his face with his hands, trying not to laugh out loud. Samantha Brooks had turned away from her console entirely, her shoulders shaking with suppressed giggles. Even Dr. Carter, who was usually very serious about first contact protocols, was smiling broadly. We ... Admiral Vexthow seemed to be struggling with words. This is not how lesser species are supposed to respond to the might of the Zephyrian Empire. Morrison sat back down in his command chair, completely relaxed. Well, Admiral, maybe. That's because we're not a lesser species. We're humans, and we have this funny habit of not being impressed by empty threats and pompous speeches. Lisa was monitoring the alien fleet's communications, and she reported quietly to Morrison. Sir, they're talking amongst themselves on internal channels. They sound completely confused. I don't think they know how to handle our response. Lieutenant. Commander Carlos Mendez, the fleet's intelligence officer, had been quietly analyzing the alien ships during the entire exchange. He approached Morrison's chair and spoke in a low voice. Captain, their defensive systems are laughably outdated. If this turned into a fight, we could disable their entire fleet without breaking a sweat. Morrison nodded, but kept his attention. On the communication channel, Admiral Vexthow was speaking again, and this time he sounded almost desperate. You will show proper respect to the Zephyrian Empire. We have conquered countless worlds and destroyed millions of ships. Your mockery is ... is unprecedented. Unprecedented? Morrison repeated. Admiral, has it occurred to you that maybe the reason you've conquered so many worlds is because everyone else was too polite to point out how ridiculous you sound? The alien admiral's voice rose to an almost shrill level. Ridiculous? We are the masters of space itself. Our empire spans half the galaxy. Our weapons can destroy entire planets. Samantha Brooks looked up from her readings and called out, Captain, their weapon systems are charging, but they're moving incredibly slowly. It would take them at least 5 minutes to achieve a target lock on our ships. Morrison stood up again, his voice taking on a more serious tone, but still maintaining its casual confidence. Admiral Vexthow, let me explain something to you. We humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We've fought each other, we've fought our environment, and we fought every challenge the universe has thrown at us. We didn't survive by being impressed by big ships and fancy speeches. The communication channel crackled with static before the Admiral responded. Then you choose destruction over submission? We choose neither, Morrison replied. We choose to treat you exactly like what you are. A bunch of bullies who've gotten used to everyone being afraid of you. The only difference is, we're not afraid. Dr. Carter approached Morrison with her tablet. Captain, I've been analyzing their speech patterns and responses. Their entire culture appears to be built around hierarchy and intimidation. They literally don't know how to deal with a species that responds to threats with humor. Morrison nodded and returned to the communication channel. Admiral, here's what's going to happen. We're going to continue on our way, and you're going to let us pass. If you want to tag along and keep making threats, That's fine with us. We could use the entertainment. The response came back almost immediately, and Admiral Vexthul sounded absolutely furious. Entertainment? You dare call the mighty Zephyrian Empire entertainment? Well, Morrison said with a grin that could be heard in his voice, if the space boot fits. Lisa reported that the alien fleet was moving into what appeared to be an attack formation, though they were doing it very slowly and with a lot of unnecessary ceremony. Morrison looked around at his crew, all of whom seemed more amused than concerned about the situation. This is going to be interesting, he said quietly. Admiral Vexthul had reached the end of his patience with these strange humans. Never in his 40 years of military service had he encountered a species that responded to imperial authority with jokes and casual dismissal. The honor of the Zephyrian Empire demanded action, and he would not be the first admiral to let inferior beings mock the might of his people. All ships, prepare for a demonstration of power, he commanded across the fleet communication system. We will show these primitives what happens when they dare to insult the Empire. Captain Morrison watched from the Liberty's bridge as the massive alien ships began moving into position. Their movements were slow and predictable, like an elaborate dance that had been practiced countless times. Each ship took its designated place in the formation with mathematical precision, but the entire process took nearly 20 minutes to complete. They're really taking their time with this, Ryan? Tucker observed from his tactical station. At this rate, we could have jumped to another system and back before they finish getting ready. Lisa Hayes was monitoring the alien communications and shaking her head in disbelief. Captain, they're spending more time coordinating their formation than most species spend planning entire battles. Every move has to be approved by 3 different command levels. The alien fleet finally completed their intimidating formation, with Admiral Vexthul's flagship at the center and the other ships arranged in a perfect circle around the human vessels. It would have been impressive if it hadn't taken so long to achieve. Attention, human vessels. Admiral Vexthul's voice boomed across the communication channels. Witness the power of the Zephyrian Empire in despair. The alien ships began charging their weapons, and energy readings spiked across Morrison's tactical displays. Massive plasma cannons emerged from hidden ports along the sides of each vessel, glowing with barely contained energy. The sight would have been terrifying to most species, but the human crew just watched with professional interest. Those plasma systems are at least 3 centuries out of date, Samantha Brooks reported from her engineering station. The charging time alone makes them sitting ducks in any real battle. Morrison opened a communication channel back to the Admiral. Are you guys planning to fire those things sometime today? Or should we grab some lunch while we wait? The response was immediate and furious. Fire warning shots. Admiral Vexthul ordered his fleet. Show them what Zephyrian precision looks like. 15 massive plasma bolts erupted from the alien ships, each one bright enough to light up the surrounding space like a small sun. The energy discharge was impressive, the light show was spectacular, and the aim was absolutely terrible. Every single shot missed the human fleet by at least 10 kilometers. Some by much more. Morrison watched the plasma bolts streak harmlessly past his ships and sighed deeply. Admiral Vexthul, are you guys firing those things with a joystick from the 1980s? Because I've seen video games with better targeting systems. The silence that followed lasted even longer than before. Dr. Carter, who had been studying the alien responses, looked up from her tablet with fascination. Captain, I think we just witnessed their best effort at intimidation. Their entire military doctrine appears to be based on the assumption that enemies will surrender before any actual fighting begins. Lieutenant Commander Carlos Mendez had been quietly working at his intelligence station during the exchange. He looked up with a mischievous grin. Captain, their communication systems are so outdated that I was able to hack into their network without them even noticing. Would you like me to return the favor for their warning shots? Morrison raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? Well, sir, they seem to enjoy dramatic presentations. I thought we might give them one of our own. Carlos's fingers were already dancing across his console, bypassing alien security systems like they were made of paper. Within seconds, every screen on every Zephyrian ship began displaying the same image. A video that started with the Earth song, Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. The confusion that erupted across the alien fleet was immediate and total. Crew members who had never heard Earth music before found themselves listening to what humans called a rickroll, while their command systems became temporarily unresponsive. What is this noise? Admiral Vexthul's voice cut through the music, sounding more confused than angry. How did you infiltrate our systems? Morrison was trying very hard not to laugh out loud. Admiral, that's what we humans call a practical joke. Consider it our response to your warning shots. The chaos that followed was better than any comedy show. 3 Zephyrian ships, their crews distracted by the unexpected music, and their captains frantically trying to regain control of their systems, collided with each other during a routine formation maneuver. The impacts weren't serious enough to cause real damage, but they were embarrassing enough to make the entire alien fleet look incompetent. This is unacceptable, Admiral Vexthul announced once his crew had finally regained control of their systems. You have violated every known law of civilized warfare. Actually, Dr. Carter interjected over the communication channel, we haven't fired a single shot or made any aggressive moves. All we did was play music on your computers and make jokes. If that counts as warfare in your empire, you guys really need to get out more. Morrison decided it was time to escalate their response. The aliens clearly didn't understand subtle mockery, so perhaps a more direct approach would work better. All ships, prepare for maneuvers, he announced to his fleet. The human ships, smaller and far more agile than their alien counterparts, began moving in perfect synchronization. They performed a series of barrel rolls around the massive Zephyrian vessels, weaving between them like dancers performing an intricate ballet. The contrast was striking. Huge, slow alien ships trying to maintain their intimidating formation, while tiny human vessels danced circles around them. Play some music to go with our performance, Morrison ordered Lisa. Something classical. How about Beethoven's Ninth Symphony? The majestic strains of one of Earth's greatest musical achievements began broadcasting on all frequencies as the human fleet continued their aerial dance around the confused aliens. The sight of small ships performing impossible maneuvers while broadcasting beautiful music turned the entire confrontation into something resembling an art performance rather than a military encounter. Admiral Vexthul's voice cut through this music, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely frightened rather than angry. What kind of species are you? This behavior is completely unprecedented in the history of galactic civilization. Morrison brought his ship out of a particularly complex spiral maneuver before responding. We're humans, Admiral. We do things differently. The question is, what kind of species are you? Because from where we're sitting, you look like a bunch of bullies who've never had anyone stand up to them before. Dr. Carter had been taking detailed notes throughout the encounter, and she approached Morrison with her findings. Captain, their entire social structure appears to be based on rigid hierarchy and the assumption that superior technology equals superior species. They literally cannot process the concept of a militarily inferior force that refuses to show fear. Sir, Ryan Tucker called out from his station, I'm reading massive energy spikes from their command ship. It looks like Admiral Vexthul is trying to contact someone. Morrison nodded, probably calling for backup. Lisa, can you monitor that transmission? Already on it, Captain, Lisa replied. He's sending an emergency message to something called the High Command. He's reporting that they've encountered a species that appears to be militarily insane and tactically unpredictable. The human crew burst into laughter at this description. Morrison wiped tears from his eyes before responding. Militarily insane? Admiral, we haven't even started fighting yet. This is just us being friendly. Friendly? Admiral Vexthul's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. You call this friendship? Well, we could be unfriendly if you prefer, Morrison replied cheerfully. But trust me, you really don't want to see what humans do when we stop being polite. Carlos looked up from his console with another update. Captain, I'm intercepting more communications from their fleet. It sounds like several of their ship captains are requesting permission to withdraw from the encounter. They're calling us a Class 7 anomaly and recommending immediate strategic retreat. Morrison stood up and walked to the main view screen, looking out at the massive alien ships that surrounded his small fleet. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned by any conventional measure, he felt completely confident in the situation. The aliens had revealed their weakness. They were so used to easy victories through intimidation that they had no idea how to handle an opponent who refused to be intimidated. Admiral Vexthul, Morrison said, his voice carrying across the communication. Channels, let me make you an offer. You and your ships can continue on your way, and we'll continue on ours. No harm, no foul. We'll even promise not to tell anyone about the part where you missed us with 15 shots at point-blank range. The response came back immediately, and Admiral Vexthul sounded absolutely outraged. The Zephyrian Empire does not negotiate with primitive species. Fleet Admiral Corvex arrived in the Kepler 442 system with the pride of the Zephyrian Navy, 200 of the Empire's finest warships arranged in perfect battle formation. His flagship, the Eternal Glory, was twice the size of any vessel in Admiral Vexthul's border patrol, and the fleet that followed him represented enough firepower to reduce entire planets to cosmic dust. This should have been a simple matter of crushing a few primitive ships and restoring imperial dignity. What he found instead was Admiral Vexthul's 15 ships arranged in a defensive circle around 5 tiny human vessels, with both fleets, apparently just sitting in space, staring at each other. The humans were still playing their strange music and occasionally performing what could only be described as aerial acrobatics around the much larger alien ships. Admiral Vexthul, Fleet. Admiral Corvex's voice boomed across the communication channels. Explain this situation immediately. Vexthul's response came through private channels, and he sounded deeply embarrassed. Fleet Admiral, these humans are unlike any species we have encountered before. They respond to threats with mockery. They ignore our superior firepower, and they appear to be completely immune to intimidation. Corvex studied the tactical displays showing the human ships. They were indeed small and apparently insignificant, yet something about their casual movement patterns suggested a level of technological sophistication that didn't match their size. Have they made any aggressive moves? No, sir. They have not fired a single shot. Instead, they infiltrated our computer systems to play primitive music, performed unauthorized maneuvers around our ships, and responded to our demonstration of power with jokes and insults. Fleet Admiral Corvex had served the Empire for 60 years and had never heard such a ridiculous report. Jokes and insults? Admiral Vexthul, are you telling me that 15 of our finest warships have been held at bay by comedy? The silence that followed answered his question better than words could have. Corvex decided that a proper display of imperial might would resolve this embarrassing situation quickly. All ships, prepare for the Grand Fleet formation. We will show these primitives what real power looks like. Captain Morrison watched from the Liberty's bridge as 200 massive alien ships began moving into an elaborate formation that stretched across thousands of kilometers of space. The precision, was impressive, but the time it took was absurd. Each ship had to receive individual positioning orders, confirm those orders with 3 separate command levels, and then execute the movements at a ceremonial pace that emphasized grandeur over efficiency. They're really committed to this whole intimidation thing, aren't they? Ryan Tucker observed as the alien fleet slowly arranged itself into what appeared to be a giant arrow pointing directly at the human ships. "Captain," Lisa Hayes called out from her communication station, "we're receiving another transmission. This one's coming from a ship that's about twice the size of anything we've seen so far." Morrison settled into his command chair with his coffee mug, which someone had thoughtfully refilled during the wait. "Put it on speakers, Lisa. Let's hear what they have to say this time." The voice that came through the communication system was even more pompous and self-important than Admiral. Vexthals had been primitive beings of the species called human. "I am Fleet Admiral Corvex of the Imperial Navy, commanding 200 warships of the mighty Zephyrian Empire. You now face the combined might of our most elite forces." Dr. Carter had been studying the alien communications and social patterns since the first encounter, and she looked up from her notes with a fascinated expression. "Captain, their entire culture appears to be built around ceremony and hierarchy. Every action requires multiple levels of approval, and they seem to believe that impressive displays automatically translate to victory." The fleet admiral continued his speech, which was somehow even longer and more elaborate than his subordinates had been. He described the history of the Zephyrian Empire, their countless victories over inferior species, their divine mandate to rule the galaxy, and their sophisticated military doctrine that had never failed in 1,000 years of conquest. Morrison took a sip of his coffee and waited patiently for the speech to end. After 20 minutes, Fleet Admiral Corvex finally reached his conclusion. "You will immediately surrender your vessels and submit to Zephyrian authority, or face the complete annihilation of your pathetic fleet." Morrison activated the communication system and responded in the same casual tone he had used with Admiral Vexthal. "Fleet Admiral Corvex, that was a very impressive speech. Did you write it yourself? Or do you guys have a department that handles dramatic monologues?" The response came back immediately, and the fleet admiral sounded genuinely confused. What kind of response is that?" "An honest one," Morrison replied. "Look, Admiral, we appreciate the effort you put into that presentation, but we're still not impressed. You brought more ships, which is nice, but they're still using the same outdated technology and the same slow tactical responses." Captain Alan Foster had arrived with human reinforcements just hours before the alien fleet's appearance. His ship, the U.E.'s Defiance, along with 4 other vessels, had joined Morrison's original 5 ships to form a small but highly advanced human task force. Foster opened his own communication channel to address the aliens. "Fleet Admiral Corvex, this is Captain Alan Foster. We've been monitoring your fleet's movements, and we have to ask, do you always take 3 hours to get into formation? Because in a real battle, the enemy usually doesn't wait around for you to arrange your ships in pretty patterns." The alien fleet admiral's voice rose in anger. "Your insolence will not be tolerated. The Grand Fleet formation represents thousands of years of military tradition and tactical superiority." Chief Navigator Patricia Wells, who had been coordinating between the human ships, looked up from her console with a mischievous grin. "Captain Morrison, Captain Foster, would you like to show them what human tactical formation looks like?" Morrison and Foster exchanged glances through their view screens before Morrison responded. "What did you have in mind, Patricia?" "Well, sir, since they seem to enjoy visual displays, I thought we might spell out a message for them using our ship positions." Within minutes, the 10 human ships had arranged themselves into a formation that, when viewed from the alien flagship, spelled out a simple message: Your formation sucks." The maneuver took less than 5 minutes to complete and demonstrated a level of coordination and precision that made the alien fleet's ponderous movements look even more ridiculous by comparison. Lieutenant Commander Carlos Mendez had been busy during the aliens' lengthy formation process. "Captain, I've managed to intercept and decode their internal communications. Their command structure is incredibly rigid. Every tactical decision requires approval from at least 12 levels of command, and each level has to hold a formal meeting before making any decisions." Morrison shook his head in disbelief. 12 levels? How do they ever get anything done? "That's just it, sir. They don't. I've been monitoring their communications for the past hour, and they've spent more time discussing whether to respond to our formation message than most militaries spend planning entire campaigns." Dr. Carter approached Morrison with her tablet full of notes. "Captain, I've been analyzing their psychology and social structure. The Zephyrian Empire appears to be built entirely on the assumption that superior numbers and impressive displays will cause enemies to surrender before any real fighting begins. They've probably never encountered a species that responds to intimidation with humor." Fleet Admiral Corvex's voice cut through the bridge chatter. "Your crude message demonstrates the primitive nature of your species. We will now demonstrate why the Zephyrian Empire has ruled the galaxy for millennia." "Actually," Morrison replied, "you've ruled half the galaxy, and only because everyone else was too polite to point out how slow and predictable your tactics are. But please, go ahead and demonstrate. We could use the entertainment." The alien fleet began charging their weapon systems, and energy readings spiked across the human tactical displays. 200 massive plasma cannons were preparing to fire, enough concentrated firepower to vaporize anything smaller than a moon. It would have been terrifying if the charging process didn't take so long, and if the targeting systems weren't so obviously outdated. Commander Sophie Turner, who led the fighter squadrons attached to the human fleet, had been quietly analyzing the alien ships during the entire encounter. She opened a communication channel to both Morrison and Foster. "Captains, their weapon systems are incredibly powerful, but they're also incredibly slow. If we maintain standard evasive maneuvers, they won't be able to hit us, even if we painted targets on our hulls." Morrison nodded and opened a fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Let's show our new friends what human pilots can do when they're motivated." The alien fleet fired in perfect synchronization, creating a light show that would have been visible from several star systems away. 200 plasma bolts streaked through space toward the human ships, each one carrying enough energy to destroy a city. The display was impressive, the sound was thunderous, and every single shot missed its target. Emperor Zixmoreth had ruled the Zephyrian Empire for 300 years, commanding the loyalty of 1,000 worlds and the fear of countless species across half the galaxy. In all that time, no challenge to imperial authority had lasted more than a few hours. When news reached the imperial palace that a primitive species called humans was not only resisting the empire, but actually mocking it, the emperor decided that personal intervention was required. His arrival in the Kepler 442 system was nothing short of spectacular. The imperial dreadnought Cosmic Dominion emerged from hyperspace like a small moon materializing from nowhere. The ship was so massive that it had its own gravitational field, and its presence caused visible distortions in the surrounding space. Following behind it came the royal fleet, 500 of the Empire's most advanced warships arranged in perfect ceremonial formation. Captain Morrison watched the approaching fleet from the Liberty's bridge and whistled softly. "Now that's what I call making an entrance," he said to his crew. "Ryan, what are we looking at?" Lieutenant Commander Ryan Tucker was staring at his tactical displays in amazement. "Captain, That lead ship is reading as approximately 50 kilometers long and 20 kilometers wide. It's not just a starship, it's a mobile space station. The energy signature suggests it has enough firepower to destroy entire planets. Dr. Carter looked up from her xenobiology notes with fascination. Captain, the psychological impact of that arrival was clearly calculated to inspire absolute terror. Most species would probably surrender immediately just from seeing something that large. The Emperor's arrival was accompanied by a 6-hour ceremony that included holographic fireworks, synchronized fleet maneuvers, and what appeared to be a full orchestra playing martial music that could be heard across all communication frequencies. The display was undeniably impressive, but the human crews found themselves more entertained than intimidated. 6 hours, Lisa Hayes commented from her communication station. They spent 6 hours on a ceremonial entrance. At this rate, we could have explored 3 new star systems while they were getting into position. When the ceremony finally ended, Emperor Zixmarth's voice echoed across the communication channels. Unlike his subordinates, the Emperor's voice carried the weight of absolute authority and 3 centuries of unquestioned rule. I am Emperor Zixmarth, ruler of the Zephyrian Empire, master of 1,000 worlds, and divine sovereign of half the galaxy. Never in the history of our great civilization has any species dared to mock imperial authority as you have done. Morrison took a sip of his coffee and activated the communication system. Your Majesty, that's quite an impressive ship you have there. Did it come with instructions, or did you have to figure out all those buttons by yourself? The silence that followed was so complete that Morrison wondered if the communication system had failed. Dr. Carter was scribbling notes frantically, clearly fascinated by the Emperor's psychological response to humor. Finally, after nearly 5 minutes, the Emperor's voice returned, and it carried a tone of genuine bewilderment. Did you just make a joke about the Imperial Dreadnought? Well, Morrison replied, it wasn't my best material, but yes. I mean, it's a very nice ship, but it seems a bit excessive for dealing with 10 human vessels. It's like bringing a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. Captain Foster joined the conversation from his ship, the Defiance. Your Majesty, we have to ask, do you always travel with 500 ships just to have a conversation? Because that seems like a logistics nightmare. Emperor Zixmarth's response revealed both his confusion and his growing anger. You dare to question imperial protocol? The ceremony you witnessed represents thousands of years of tradition and the dignity of our great empire. Actually, Doctor, Carter interjected over the communication channel, we found it quite entertaining. It was like watching a really elaborate parade, except with spaceships instead of floats. Morrison could see that the Emperor was struggling to process their responses. According to every intelligence report and historical record in the human database, first contact situations involving overwhelming displays of force typically ended with immediate surrender or desperate attempts at negotiation. The humans were doing neither, and it was clearly breaking the Emperor's understanding of how the universe worked. Your Majesty, Morrison said, adopting a more serious tone, let me explain something to you. We humans have a long history of dealing with bullies, tyrants, and people who think they can intimidate us into submission. It never works out well for them. The Emperor's response came back immediately, and his voice carried the full weight of imperial fury. Bullies? Tyrants? I am the rightful ruler of half the galaxy, chosen by destiny itself to bring order to the chaos of space. Chosen by destiny? Captain Foster replied, that's what they all say. Let me guess. You conquered all those worlds because it was your divine right, your superior technology, and your natural authority over lesser species. Exactly, the Emperor replied, apparently missing the sarcasm entirely. The Zephyrian Empire represents the pinnacle of galactic civilization. Morrison exchanged glances with his bridge crew, all of whom were shaking their heads in amazement. Your Majesty, has it ever occurred to you that maybe those worlds surrendered because they were afraid of your big ships, not because they actually thought you were superior? The communication channel went quiet again, and Morrison could imagine the chaos that must be occurring on the Imperial Bridge. Emperor Zixmareth had probably never had anyone question the fundamental assumptions of his empire before. Lieutenant Commander Carlos Mendez looked up from his intelligence station with an update. Captain, I'm intercepting communications from across the Imperial fleet. The Emperor's arrival has actually made their command structure even more rigid. Now every decision requires his personal approval, which means they're moving even slower than before. Dr. Carter approached Morrison with her latest analysis. Captain, I believe we're witnessing a complete psychological breakdown of their entire worldview. The Zephyrian Empire is built on the assumption that superior force equals superior right to rule. We're proving that assumption wrong simply by refusing to be impressed. Emperor Zixmareth's voice returned to the communication channels, and this time he sounded almost desperate. I challenge you to single combat, one of your vessels against my personal dreadnought. When you are defeated, your entire species will acknowledge Zephyrian superiority and submit to Imperial rule. Morrison raised an eyebrow at this unexpected development. Single combat? Your Majesty, your ship is 1,000 times larger than any of ours. That hardly seems fair. The size difference merely reflects the natural superiority of the Zephyrian Empire, the Emperor replied. If you truly believe your species is equal to ours, you will accept this challenge. Morrison looked around at his bridge crew, who were all watching him with expressions ranging from excitement to concern. Captain Foster's voice came through the intership communication system. Jake, you're not seriously considering this, are you? Actually, Morrison replied, I think I am. But I want to propose a modification to the Emperor's challenge. He activated the communication channel back to the Imperial flagship. Your Majesty, we accept your challenge, but we'd like to add a condition. When we win, you have to broadcast an apology to the entire galaxy, admitting that the Zephyrian Empire isn't as impressive as you claim. The Emperor's response was immediate and furious. When you win, your arrogance knows no bounds. Very well, but when you lose, your species will serve the Empire for 1,000 years. Deal, Morrison replied without hesitation. But since we're making this a formal challenge, let's make it interesting. The loser has to wear something embarrassing during their broadcast. Dr. Carter looked at Morrison with alarm. Captain, are you sure about this? That ship has enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. Morrison stood up and walked to the main view screen, looking out at the massive Imperial dreadnought. Helen, that ship represents everything that's wrong with the Zephyrian Empire. It's big, it's impressive, and it's designed to intimidate rather than fight. I think it's time someone showed the galaxy that size isn't everything. Commander Sophie Turner had been quietly analyzing the Emperor's ship since its arrival. She approached Morrison with her findings. Captain, I've been studying that dreadnought's specifications. It's incredibly powerful, but it's also incredibly slow and unwieldy. If we could get a small, fast ship close enough to exploit its blind spots... Morrison turned to face his tactical officer. Sophie, are you volunteering? Actually, sir, I am. My modified fighter has the speed and maneuverability to dance around that monster. Plus, I've been looking forward to a challenge. Ryan Tucker looked up from his station with concern. Captain, even our best ship is no match for that thing in a straight fight. The firepower difference is astronomical. Morrison smiled confidently. Ryan, who said anything about a straight fight? We're humans. We don't do straight fights. Emperor Zixmareth's voice cut through the bridge conversation. Have you selected your champion, or do you wish to withdraw your acceptance of my challenge? Morrison activated the communication system one more time. Your Majesty, we're ready when you are. But I should warn you. Captain Amy Stevens settled into the cockpit of her modified fighter, the Stinger, and ran through her pre-flight checklist one final time. The small ship was barely larger than an ancient Earth fighter jet, but it contained the most advanced human technology available: quantum engines, adaptive shields, and weapon systems that could punch holes through armor plating 10 times thicker than anything the ship's size should be able to handle. More importantly, it was fast, maneuverable, and piloted by someone who had never met a challenge she couldn't handle with humor and skill. "All systems green," she reported to Captain Morrison over the communication channel. "I'm ready to show His Imperial Majesty what one human pilot can do against a ship the size of a small moon." Emperor Zixmaris's voice boomed across all frequencies as his massive dreadnought moved into position. "Behold the power of the Cosmic Dominion, greatest warship ever constructed. Your pathetic fighter will be destroyed so quickly that you will not even have time to regret your species' arrogance." Stevens activated her external communication system and broadcast on all frequencies, including the galactic network that was carrying the confrontation to billions of viewers across known space. "Ladies, gentlemen, and various galactic species, welcome to today's David versus Goliath match, brought to you by human stubbornness and alien ego. I'm your pilot and commentator, Amy Stevens, and we're about to find out whether size really matters in a spacefight." A massive Imperial dreadnought began charging its weapons, and energy readings spiked across every sensor in the system. The ship's primary cannon alone was larger than most vessels, and the dozen secondary weapons arrays could have destroyed entire fleets. The sight would have been terrifying if Stevens hadn't been too busy analyzing the ship's design flaws too. Be impressed. Now, folks, you'll notice that our opponent has chosen the bigger is better approach to ship design. Stevens continued her commentary as she began her approach run. It's an understandable strategy, but it does have a few drawbacks. For example, that massive size makes it about as maneuverable as a space station, and all those weapons take forever to charge and aim. Emperor Zixmarith's response was immediate and furious. "Your mockery will end when you are vaporized by Imperial firepower." "Actually, Your Majesty, I think my mockery is just getting started," Stevens replied as she put her fighter into a complex spiral pattern that brought her closer to the dreadnought, while making her nearly impossible to target. "Let me ask you something. When was the last time that ship actually fought someone who shot back? Because I'm getting the impression that it's designed more for intimidation than actual combat." The Emperor's primary cannon fired, sending a beam of energy bright enough to be seen from neighboring star systems. The shot was powerful enough to vaporize a small asteroid, precisely aimed, and completely ineffective, because Stevens had already moved to a different position by the time the weapon fired. The targeting system, designed for use against large, slow-moving targets, simply couldn't keep up with a human pilot who refused to fly in predictable patterns. "Oh, that was close," Stevens said with exaggerated concern. "I felt the heat from that shot all the way over here. Of course, over here is about 50 kilometers from where you aimed, but I'm sure you'll get the hang of it eventually." The massive ship began firing all of its weapons at once, creating a light show that could be seen across half the galaxy. Dozens of energy beams, plasma bolts, and missile barrages filled the space around Stevens' fighter, each one carrying enough destructive power to level a city. The display was awesome in the truest sense of the word, and it would have been absolutely devastating against any conventional target. Stevens, however, was not a conventional target. She wove through the weapon's fire like a dancer performing an impossible ballet, using micro-jumps and momentum shifts that pushed both her ship and her body to their absolute limits. Her running commentary continued throughout the entire display. "And there goes the Emperor's entire weapons array, Ladies and gentlemen, I have to say, it's quite a light show. Very impressive, very dramatic, and about as accurate as a stormtrooper convention. I've seen Imperial stormtroopers with better aim, and those guys couldn't hit the broadside of a Death Star. Emperor Zixmarth's voice cut through the weapon fire, and for the first time, he sounded genuinely concerned rather than just angry. How are you evading our targeting systems? This is impossible. Your Majesty, Stevens replied as she led the massive ship on a chase through a nearby asteroid field. The problem with your targeting systems is that they're designed to fight other big, slow ships that politely hold still while you shoot at them. We humans have a different approach to combat. We call it not getting hit. The chase through the asteroid field was the turning point of the battle. The Imperial dreadnought, despite its massive size and firepower, simply couldn't maneuver through the tight spaces between the asteroids. Stevens, on the other hand, zipped between the rocks like they were traffic cones, occasionally using the larger asteroids as cover while she planned her next move. Now we're playing the galaxy's most expensive game of pinball, Stevens announced, as the Emperor's ship scraped against a particularly large asteroid. And it looks like His Imperial Majesty is having some trouble with the controls. That's going to leave a mark on the paint job. Captain Morrison, watching from the Liberty, opened a communication channel to Stevens. Amy, you're doing great out there, but do you have an actual plan for winning this thing? Because entertaining as this is, you can't dodge forever. Stevens grinned, even though no one could see her expression inside the fighter's cockpit. Actually, Captain, I do have a plan. It's based on the oldest human military strategy in the book. Get the enemy so angry that they make a stupid mistake. She was right about the Emperor's emotional state. Emperor Zixmarth had gone from confident to concerned to absolutely furious, as he watched his massive flagship being outmaneuvered by a ship that could have fit in one of his cargo holds. His voice echoed across all communication channels, and it was clear that he had completely lost his imperial composure. This is intolerable. No inferior species has ever humiliated the Zephyrian Empire like this. All weapons, maximum power. Destroy that insignificant pest, regardless of collateral damage. Stevens saw her opportunity and took it immediately. Your Majesty, are you sure you want to fire maximum power weapons while you're surrounded by your own support fleet? Because that seems like it might cause some friendly fire incidents. But the Emperor was beyond rational thought. He ordered every weapon on his massive ship to fire at maximum power, creating an energy discharge that lit up the entire star system. The problem was that Stevens had positioned herself directly between the Imperial dreadnought and three of its own support vessels. When the Emperor fired everything he had, Stevens used a microjump to appear behind one of the support ships. Just as the energy beams reached her position, the result was exactly what any human military strategist would have predicted. The Emperor's own weapons, fired in rage rather than with tactical precision, struck his own support fleet. 3 massive Zephyrian warships were disabled by their own flagship's weapons, and the explosion from their damaged engines created a chain reaction that disabled several more vessels. Oops, Stevens said over the communication channels. Your Majesty, I think you just shot your own ships. That's going to be awkward to explain to your insurance company. The Emperor's response was a wordless roar of fury as he pushed his ships, weapon systems beyond their design limits, in a desperate attempt to destroy the mocking human. The Cosmic Dominion's primary cannon began charging for a shot that would have enough power to crack a moon. But the strain of continuous maximum power firing had pushed the ancient weapon systems beyond their tolerance levels. Stevens watched. Her sensors as energy readings from the Imperial dreadnought began spiking erratically. Captain Morrison, I think His Imperial Majesty is about to have a very bad day. His weapon systems are overloading. The explosion that followed could be seen from 3 star systems away. The Imperial Dreadnought's primary weapon system, pushed beyond its limits by an enraged Emperor, suffered a catastrophic failure that disabled the entire ship. Emergency systems activated across the massive vessel as it lost power to engines, weapons, and even life support in some sections. Dot Stevens positioned her fighter directly in front of the disabled Dreadnought's bridge and opened a communication. "Channel, Your Imperial Majesty, I believe you just lost our little wager. According to the terms we agreed on, you now owe the galaxy an apology broadcast while wearing something embarrassing." Emperor Zixnarath's voice, when it finally came through the communication system, sounded hollow and defeated. "This is impossible. The Zephyrian Empire has never been defeated by a single fighter craft." "Well," Stevens replied cheerfully, "there's a first time for everything. Now, about that apology broadcast. We took the liberty of designing a costume for you to wear. It's a traditional human court jester outfit, complete with bells and a funny hat. The image that was broadcast across the Galactic Network 30 minutes later became the most widely viewed piece of media in galactic history.